It's pretty common knowledge in the automotive industry by now, but if you don't already know, this new Toyota Supra and the BMW Z4 are based on the same chassis. They were built in joint together by both Toyota and BMW. However, about 80% of this car's parts are BMW parts. The engine is a BMW B58 straight 6, the transmission is the same ZF unit used in every other BMW, and most of the technology and interior bits in this car come from BMW's parts bin. Now, most enthusiasts were disappointed by that, to be honest with you. The idea of a Japanese automotive icon becoming mostly Bavarian is a bit upsetting, especially to Supra enthusiasts. And most journalists have panned this car publicly after driving it, saying that it feels too much like a BMW. If I'm being honest, I actually went into this drive with really low expectations. I had just assumed that I would agree with all of those journalists, all of those same enthusiasts who drove this and were disappointed by its BMW-like feel. And after the first couple of days, I was a bit disappointed. I've spent a lot of time in the BMW Z4, so I know it very well. I know how it drives, I know how its steering feels, I know how its suspension feels, I know how the BMW Z4 feels. And after getting in this thing for the first time, I immediately went, yep, feels like a Z4. Which disappointed me a lot. But then I started to drive it a little bit more, and more, and more. And I spent more days with it. Took it on longer drives, twistier roads, really started to feel it. And yes, it still feels a lot like a Z4, but there are tiny subtle differences, little ones, that distinguish the Supra enough from the Z4 that it feels like its own product. Not entirely its own product, but enough of its own to give you reason to buy this over the Z4. And honestly, after driving it for a few days, I'm really starting to like it. And what surprises me most about that is this car is a 2020 model year. This isn't even the newly updated 2021 model year car. You see, Toyota realized some of the criticisms it was facing and decided to give it a really quick update just 1 year later. Apparently, those updates have made a big difference. Most journalists say that the 2021 model feels quite a bit better than this one. And I like this one. So I'm very excited about the 2021 model. So what are the things about the Supra that feel a lot like a BMW? What feels BMW-like about this car? Well, for one, the engine, obviously. It's a BMW engine. It's a 3-liter turbocharged B58, codename B58 straight 6. In this car, it makes 335 horsepower, 369 pound-feet of torque. That's the same as you'd get in like a BMW X5. However, for 2021, it gets the 382 horsepower version that you'll find in the BMW M340i. So that is the more powerful one. However, you will never, ever want for more power in this car. It is shockingly fast. There's no way this engine only makes 335 horsepower. And we know because people have dyno tested both the Supra and other BMWs with the same engine, and it always makes more power. This is a seriously fast car. It even sounds like a BMW. But what's interesting about that is inside the car, there's some speaker trickery going on, you can tell, because it sounds different inside than it does outside. Now inside the car, it definitely sounds very BMW interior speakery noise. It sounds exactly the same as every other BMW with the, the speaker exhaust trickery. However, outside the car, it still sounds like a BMW, but it sounds a bit different. It's a little bit sharper, a little bit raspier, at least to my ear, than the BMW M340i. And it sounds very good. And when you put it in sport mode, the exhaust really opens up and you get tons of pops and bangs and burbles. It sounds like distant machine gun fire when you lift off the throttle. There is one area where I think this car is better than the BMW Z4, and it's steering. it seems to have a little bit more feedback through the wheel. I seem to get a better judge of what the front tires are doing. And I actually think a lot of it comes down to the steering wheel itself. It's a small, subtle difference, but Toyota has carved away some of the thickness and extra chunkiness of modern BMW steering wheels. So it's very thin. It's a very thin rim, and it feels surprisingly nice. It's very refreshing to feel a thin steering wheel because I'm so used to BMW's real thick, meaty, chunky ones. It also seems to return on center better than what I remember the BMW Z4 doing. It sort of really naturally, progressively rotates back on center. I also really like the gauge cluster. It's a little thing, again, these are minor, subtle differences. It's just a central tack. Now the actual gauge itself is analog, it's physically there with real numbers. Can you imagine that? Now, admittedly, the needle inside of that is digital, and you have digital speed on the left and digital information on the right. Now this car has a head-up display, but I don't even use it because I really like the gauges and I like the clear view out of my windshield. It's much more enjoyable to use than the one in the Z4. So BMW, take notice, this is how you should do gauges from now on. Another thing that BMW could learn from Toyota is the sport button. Because in this car, it's a sport button. There aren't 18 million different configurable modes for your steering and suspension and engine and transmission and braking and traction and everything. Just one button. It says sport on it. Now, admittedly, that sport button is configurable. You can configure what that sport mode is, but there's only one, and that's it. You configure it one time, and then you just hit the sport button. Now, there's a drawback to that, admittedly. There's no separate exhaust configuration. And the reason I say that is because this car is best in comfort everything. I like the lighter steering, I like the longer throttle, and I like the softer suspension. Comfort everything is this car's best setup. However, in comfort everything, you don't get, or normal mode, the non-sport mode, you don't get the loud exhaust. You do get the loud exhaust if you put the engine in sport mode, but then it's just far too herky-jerky. So you can't have both, and that's kind of disappointing. And as you'll see, or hear, the sport exhaust sounds pretty good. It's a fun little car. This thing's fun to drive. And yes, it feels very BMW-like in a lot of ways. But I'm starting not to care. There are just so many good things about this car. Its performance, it's just so fast. Its steering, it really does steer really nicely. Its chassis is well balanced and it's playful. It's willing to rotate nicely on corner exit, and you can catch it and slide it. I mean, the BMW Z4 is the same way. This is a brilliant chassis. It really is fantastic. I like the interior. I think even though it's a bit boring, it looks cool. These seats are fantastic, lovely, wonderfully supportive, comfortable, they feel good, they look cool. This is a really good car. But I didn't get to the best part of it. The best part about this car, by far and away, is the way it looks. Over the years of doing this job, I've tested a lot of cars. A lot of very expensive, very fast, very good-looking cars. Almost none of them, regardless of the price tag, have ever garnered as much attention as this. I drive around and everybody who sees it loves it. I get waves and thumbs up and people shouting through windows of their own car to tell me to rev it up, to gun it. People love this car. Everyone seems to have a positive reaction when they see this car, and so do I. And that's the best part. If you own this car, every time you leave your house and see it in your driveway, you get a positive reaction. It's a fantastic looking thing. Are there some negatives to this car? Yes, absolutely. One of them is the auto start stop, which does not default to off. So every time I get in, I forget to turn it off, and then this really awesome sports car pulls up to a stoplight and then just dies. It also has a massive blind spot. Although it looks incredible from the outside, that B pillar or C pillar whatever, is enormous, so you can't see anything over your shoulders, which means you have to rely on the blind spot monitors, which are BMWs, which I don't like because they're just these tiny, tiny little orange triangles that at a quick glance when you're trying to drive on a frantic highway can be difficult to see. And turning out of tight junctions can be really tricky. I've had to angle the car awkwardly so I can see more out of the side window. And that gets kind of annoying after a while. There's also a lot of wind buffeting, which I shall now demonstrate. If you roll all the windows down, or both windows down, it only takes going about 40 miles per hour, 45 miles per hour before it really starts to buffet bad. And then it really starts to feel like your eardrums are going to explode. However, I've noticed that if you actually roll the windows up just a little bit, it doesn't buffet until much, much, much higher speed, and you still get the nice noise from the exhaust. Also, rather ironically, the one thing that Toyota didn't take from BMW was tilting all of the controls over to the driver. That little tiny few degree tilt to the driver really, really helps operate all center controls from the driver's seat. Toyota didn't do that. Everything's flat, just perfectly flat on the dashboard. So actually seeing the iDrive screen, because it is an iDrive screen, is kind of difficult. It's kind of hard to read some of the further font away, and it makes actually using the touchscreen a bit more difficult, like with Apple CarPlay and stuff. It's kind of annoying actually. You miss BMW's little tilt, and it's not just BMW that does that. Audi and Mercedes do stuff like that too, but you kind of miss the little tilt. In the end though, those little quibbles, those little tiny issues are just that, tiny issues. They just don't matter. This is a good car. I know a lot of the more cynical journalists will complain and complain and complain about how it is too much like BMW. And that's true. It is very BMW-like. But honestly, does it matter? Maybe it's just the optimist in me, but I just don't care anymore. I cared a little bit at first, but after spending a few days in it, isn't a good car just a good car? If Wolfgang Puck made you sushi, and it was unbelievable sushi, would you care that it was made by a German? I don't think I would. Good sushi's good sushi, right? A good driving sports car is a good driving sports car, and this one is a good driving sports car that looks fantastic. It looks like nothing else on the road. And I don't care that it's called a Supra. I hear a lot of enthusiasts complain that Toyota is just cashing in on brand recognition and cashing in on the Supra name without it being a proper Supra. Toyota has said that without the partnership with BMW, there wouldn't be a Supra. That it just wasn't in the books, it wasn't in the cards. Toyota didn't have the development money to make a sports car that might not be successful, that might not sell that well, especially in today's modern sports car market, which isn't very good. So Toyota needed a partner. And they chose BMW because of BMW's brilliant straight-six engines and just their, engineering might. So if BMW didn't help make the Supra, Toyota would have never made one. And I'd rather the Supra exist like this than not exist at all. They're built on I can't talk today. Actually, I like this car a lot.